It's time to start. Welcome to this seminar on financing the transition to safe, affordable, and resilient water and sanitation services in Nairobi, a co-developed policy research agenda. This seminar is arranged by EFD, the Environment for Development Initiative, which is a network of environmental economists, researchers, around the globe, with a particular focus on the Global South. My name is Daniel Slunge. I'm at the University of Gothenburg, and I will moderate this session. And we are so happy to have this seminar today, because we always say that we want to do policy-relevant research and have an impact on real life. And this experience or this research and policy engagement that we will hear about today actually received the EFD Policy Impact Award last year, because it has created this bridge to the policy side and had some impacts that we will learn about. And not only those impacts, but also how that was achieved. So with us today, we have four prominent speakers, two researchers and two from the policy side. And I'll, as a start, let them introduce themselves. So if we start with Professor Mulva, Richard Mulva, please.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. My name is Richard Mulwa from the University of Nairobi. I'm a research fellow at the Environment for Development, but also I teach at the University of Nairobi. I've been a member of EFD for quite some time now, and I'm happy to share in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And David?
Hi, I'm David Fuente from the University of South Carolina in the US. I'm an international research associate with EFD Kenya and also collaborate with centers throughout the EFD network. I've been associated with EFD since about 2012, so pretty early on, and it's been exciting to kind of watch this collaboration unfold and play a role in it. So I'm excited for the session today. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And then we have also two participants from Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company. Josia Gitu, could you please introduce yourself briefly?
Hello, Daniel and all the participants. This is not Josiah, this is Butu Mwaura. My colleague Josiah Gitu has just been called for a board of management meeting, so he has sent his apologies. I am Butu Mwaura, the Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation Manager at Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company. I've also been joined maybe with a few other colleagues, but as we progress, we shall interact more. Oh, Josiah has actually joined. Welcome, Josiah. I was just giving you an apology. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll let, thank you, Mr. Mwaura. Let's see if Mr. Gitu is also here.
Yeah, he has actually joined.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Butu, for giving my apologies. We've just finished the meeting, so I was able to join. My name is Josiah Gitu. I'm the Acting Commercial Director, Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company. And thank you for this session. I hope to have a very good discussion with the panelists.
And thanks to both of you for also illustrating the busy life on the policy side, which also makes sometimes the research policy interaction a bit challenging. So I should also say welcome to participants who watch this afterwards. Those who are joining now, we are most welcome to put questions for clarifications, etc. in the chat. There will be now like a 30-minute presentation, and then we'll open up for a discussion. And we are recording the presentations, but not the discussion. So with no further ado, I'll let the team start with their presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. I'll start the show. Let me see if I can get the slides to advance here. Great. So we've done the panel introductions, just the plan for the session today. This is a quick session. We just want to give you a flavor of how this collaboration has played out over the past decade or more. But first, we just want to run through the basics and the contours. So talk about the cast of characters, so to speak, the people who've been involved over the years. Talk a little bit about the policy engagement, because it's been a kind of robust set of policy engagement that EFD Kenya has engaged in since 2012 that's enabled and facilitated this collaboration. And then we'll kind of dive right into the research, focusing specifically on just kind of 3 studies. There's been quite a bit. And then we'll spend a bit of time reflecting on, I think, what we as researchers individually have learned from participating in this, and also as kind of institutions, EFD Kenya, and Nairobi City Water and Sewer Company. And then hopefully we have a vibrant discussion. From my perspective, this is kind of one of the most important opportunities we face as researchers. So I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say and what we can learn from each other. So intros, we already did. I'm very excited, again, just to reiterate what Daniel had said, that our colleagues from Nairobi Water could join. They're right in the midst of a strategic planning session for the company, and carving out time of their schedule is valuable and much appreciated. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over now to Professor Mulwa, Richard, just to walk us through some of the logistics of this collaboration from 2012 through the current day.
Yeah, so the collaboration with Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company started way before 2012, but we want to note what has been happening since 2012 to present. We have had quite a number of studies and people involved in these studies between the EFD Kenya and the Nairobi City Water Sewerage Company. From the university, it's been myself and Jen Maria Takimoyo. We had Moses Ikiara at some point, now with the Nature Conservancy. Then we have Jackson Otieno, currently with the Ministry of Evolution. Then our colleagues from Nairobi City Water, and Joshua Ditu, and then David, of course, and Joshua Cook from Washington State University. So those are the people that have been really involved with this. So we could go to the next slide, David. Maybe our colleagues from Nairobi City Water will be best to talk about this slide before we proceed. So either Botu or Gitu would talk on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And this is a quick introduction of the company. First, to start by noting that in Kenya, we have devolved governance structure, where according to the Constitution 2010, specifically the 4th schedule, there are shared functions between the national government and the county governments or the regional government. And in that perspective, the provision of water and sanitation services are functions of the county government. Therefore, Nairobi City County Government appointed Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company to be the sole provider of water and sewerage services to the residents of Nairobi. So in terms of sector perspective, we have just selected a few indicators, 5 of them, just to show the relative size or role that the company plays. For example, when you look at the total population served, and this one we are emphasizing it is served, not the total population, because the total population is about 5.3 million. So we serve about 4.1 million, which is like 24%. When it comes to connections, water and sewerage connections, we have about 440,000. That's again 24%. When it comes to production, we are talking about 181 million, that is per year. That's again about 40%. Then when it comes to volume built, that is about 7%. Then the bottom line, in terms of the turnover, we are talking of about 10.6 billion Kenya shillings. That's about 40% of the sector. Now, when you look at these subsector indicators, and you compare with a recent study that was done by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which was basically showing the gross county product, you realize that with Nairobi, with 3.4 trillion, is actually 28% of the county's 12.3 billion. So basically that message shows that the relative contribution of the company in terms of the subsector is actually also reflected at the economic level, at the national level. So I think that's a brief of the company, which is fully owned by Nairobi City County. So we can proceed.
Back to you, Rich.
Yes. So here are some of the works that we've been done or we've been doing over time since 2012. I'm not going to mention everything, but we've had a number of research policy days where we presented our work. We had water policy days, but more importantly, if I take you back, our engagement with Nairobi City Water was formalized in June 2013 with a memorandum of understanding between the University of Nairobi, EFT, and the Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company. So from that time on, this is about now 12 years or so since the memorandum of understanding was signed. We've been engaging with Nairobi City Water on a number of studies. And when it comes to the research collaborations, we've done a number of studies. I'm not going to deal with everything. We've had a subsidy incident study that we did. We've had also tariff simulation study, and that is what has been done. But now currently we have 2 studies that are going on. We have arrears and bill payment, and then another one on productivity analysis of water service providers in Kenya. So there's a lot that is happening between EFT Kenya and Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company. David.
Fantastic. Again, I think, as Richard said, there's a long history of collaboration here that's borne out over several research projects. Some of this has made its way into EFD working papers and the academic literature, and some of it's still working its way through the process, and some studies are still very much ongoing. But today we just want to focus on 3 studies in particular to highlight the types of impact that we've been able to see and share with Nairobi Water, and in particular to help us think about the ways in which impact is a little more complicated than we or even donors might think, right? This is a hard and messy process, and I think these 3 examples give us a sense of what that looks like. So we're just going to walk through 3 studies in particular. But the title of this session is Financing the Transition to Safe and Resilient Water and Sanitation Services. And so these 3 studies are part of this larger challenge of how do we focus resources to extend services to citizens all over Nairobi, all over Kenya, and ultimately globally. It's a big challenge. And so we started in formulating kind of 3 basic questions over time. And these questions were very much organic, right? We started very narrowly thinking about subsidies and whether or not tariffs, and in particular increasing block tariffs, a particular tariff structure, were effective at delivering subsidies to low-income households. Very narrow focus. But then we co-developed another set of research questions that's evolved, like I said, over a decade or more. So a second question was, depending on how IBTs did in terms of targeting subsidies to low-income households, do they work in general? Water utilities care about many more things than simply delivering subsidies to low-income households. So we kind of expanded our view to think carefully about whether or not IBTs are effective at achieving a multitude of objectives. And then more broadly, we started to kind of dig a little bit deeper and think about really the foundations of finance. How do we build public and political support for raising prices, right? No politician wants to raise prices, but having cost-reflective prices is essential to financing infrastructure. So we wanted to explore that issue a bit. And then fundamentally, how do we get customers to pay their bills? Working with Nairobi Water, it became clear that like many utilities, many customers struggle to pay their bills on time, and this undermines the financial sustainability of the utility. So we want to engage in a series of studies to examine this challenge. So we'll dive into the first one here. And this first question again was, does an increasing block tariff, a particular type of tariff structure that's used widely across the globe, and in particular in low and middle income countries, is that effective at delivering subsidies to low income households? The kind of rationale or intuition behind an increasing block tariff is that you can supposedly help low-income customers by keeping prices low for low levels of water use, and then recover costs from users who use more water by having higher volumetric prices as customers use more. And so we just wanted to interrogate this intuition empirically, using Nairobi water as a case study to explore this. And so just briefly, Daniel had asked that we not get too deeply into the nuts and bolts of the studies, but we did this field work over the course of kind of a year, using 2 years worth of billing data from Nairobi Water. At the time, they had about 200,000 residential accounts. We had 22 months of data. A core challenge in terms of understanding subsidy incidence, the targeting of subsidies in the water sector, is being able to link information in utilities billing records with household level socioeconomic data. So a core challenge in this study was working carefully with Nairobi Water and their marketing associates, which is what you see here, to identify particular meters and link that to particular households so we can look at water consumption and match that with socioeconomic data. Hard piece of field work for both EFD and Nairobi Water. And then we developed empirical estimates of costs based on engineering records for Nairobi. And so what did we find, right? Ann and I what do we find here? So what we're seeing here in this figure is a set of wealth quintiles from households in our household survey. If subsidies were just randomly distributed among the population, we'd expect to see that each wealth quintile would receive 20% of the subsidies. What we saw here, just looking at households with a private piped connection, is that households in the upper quintiles were receiving a disproportionate share of subsidies delivered through the water tariff. And that's precisely the opposite of the intuition of an increasing block tariff, right? Increasing block tariffs are supposed to help low-income customers who we assume use less water. But in fact, we saw kind of the opposite here in terms of delivery. When we expanded our scope of analysis to look at all residential customers in Nairobi, using a proxy of income based on geographic information and the GIS location of every account, we saw that the subsidy share basically mirrored the account share. So the IBT wasn't very effective at getting subsidies to low-income households. So that's a key piece of insight that came from this study. I remember distinctly that we were all a bit surprised Nairobi Water's leadership was very interested in this finding. One nice thing about this is when we finally got it published, the paper won the Water Resources Research Editor's Choice Award, which is awarded to kind of the top 1% of articles annually. So that was a nice accomplishment. But more importantly, what this study highlighted was that customers who didn't have a private pipe connection to the network were completely excluded by the attempts to deliver subsidies to them through the tariff. And so what this did is it led Nairobi Water, after some careful reflection, to decrease the price of water being delivered through public kiosks, both public kiosks that are manned by an individual and some new automated water ATMs that they were in the process of installing. So before the study, water was being sold at the kiosks for about 10 Kenya shillings per 20-liter jerry can. That price was brought down to 1 shilling per 20-liter jerry can from a manned kiosk and 50 cents from an automated kiosk. And I think now the price is even lower, kind of about 0.4 Kenyan shillings per cubic meter. So that was a big win for low-income customers who are getting their water from kiosks and who before were excluded from subsidies being delivered through the tariff. So a big win for Nairobi Water, a big win for EFD. So like I said before, the targeting of subsidies is only one thing that utilities might care about when they're thinking about tariff design. There's a broader set of objectives they're balancing when they're setting water prices. So a natural extension of the question is, if the increasing block tariff wasn't effective at delivering subsidies to low-income households, was it performing better across other indicators of tariff performance? So in collaboration with Nairobi Water, the team at EFD Kenya, and I developed a tariff simulation model to look at the tariff that was in place at the time, the one they were considering, 2 other increasing block tariffs that were simpler, a simple uniform price tariff, and then something that would be like marginal cost pricing with either a fixed rebate or a fixed charge, something that economists often have advocated for over time. And so we developed this tariff simulation model using Nairobi Water's billing records and their operational data about costs and assumptions about system expansion, just to evaluate the performance of tariff alternatives. I'm not going to go into the details of the findings, but we looked at water use, changes in water use or conservation, the total subsidy delivered through the tariff, the extent to which subsidies were delivered to low-income households, changes in customer welfare, and then changes in social welfare. So looking at these different performance metrics of tariff performance, we found something that was quite surprising. The uniform price with a rebate or fixed charge, or a uniform price tariff, very simple tariff structures, outperformed increasing block tariffs across each of these indicators, or performed just as well of them. And what we also found was that we had a fairly small set of tariffs here, but regardless of the pieces of the increasing block tariff, we tweaked number of blocks, size of the blocks. The tariffs didn't perform that differently. And so that really challenged kind of the conventional wisdom about implementing an increasing block tariff. So in terms of impact here, IBTs have been popular for a long time. They remain popular, but we did see some action in terms of Nairobi Water. After the study was published, they had a tariff increase, and they did simplify the increasing block tariff from 4 down to 3 blocks, which was, I think, a move in the right direction. A real key finding from the study was that customers and society at large are not helped by having prices that are too low. So one of the main findings was that prices needed to increase. And we did see that volumetric prices were increased in the tariff adjustment. And the increases ranged from about 20 to 90%, depending on customers' water use. And then in the most recent tariff, and I just learned about this recently, Nairobi Water actually moved the size of their first block from 0 to 6 to 1 to 6. So previously, customers who were either using or receiving no water still had to pay a fixed charge for being connected to the network. And now they don't have to pay that fixed charge on the volumetric part of the tariff if they're not consuming or receiving water. So this really shifts the onus on the utility to ensure they're delivering services to customers. A real takeaway for us here, and for me in particular, in terms of thinking about impact, was that impact here is really mediated by other institutions in the sector. In particular, tariffs are determined by WASREB, the water sector regulator. And so there's a push and pull between the utility for both the amount of the proposed tariff increase and what they can include in their cost base, but also the tariff structure. Right, so the utility is trying to coax higher levels of performance out of the utility by limiting the amount of cost they can pass on to the customer, and the utility is trying to recoup as much of their costs as they can. So there's a delicate dance there. And it also recently came to my attention that now WASREB has moved to a common tariff structure for all utilities in Kenya. So Nairobi Water itself has fairly limited wiggle room there. So that's kind of impact there, a little bit more complicated. We can talk about it in the Q&A. Now moving on to the third piece, how do we build public and political support for raising prices? Right, this isn't a new problem. Water and sanitation is particularly challenging because it's very capital intensive to deliver water and sanitation services, but most of that infrastructure is out of the public eye. Treatment plants are often outside of the cities. Large transmission lines come from outside of the cities to the cities, and most of the piped infrastructure is underground. So citizens don't see this. The Romans knew this, right? They invested a tremendous amount in aqueducts to bring water services to cities. And it was challenging for them to kind of show the citizens what an engineering marvel this was. And so the leaders were fairly smart, right? They installed very ornate fountains in city centers to kind of highlight the capital intensity and engineering marvel that the government was able to pursue. So inspired by this, we wanted to see if we could use that insight to kind of improve public willingness to pay or public perception of a fair price to pay for water for infrastructure in Nairobi. Nairobi's not that different than cities of ancient Rome. Water comes from 7,500 kilometers from outside of the city through a series of tunnels, reservoirs, dams, pipelines into the city, and many citizens never get a chance to see that. So the infrastructure is largely invisible. So what we did was we did a simple information treatment in a household survey that walked people through a scenario that introduced them or reminded them of the vast infrastructure that provided them access to water and sanitation services. And so this was a fairly low-tech information treatment consisting of a verbal script and then a series of pictures, which you can see here. And the elicitation was asking households what a fair price to pay for the average amount of water and use in their neighborhood was. Very straightforward. And so what we found was providing simple information on water supply infrastructure in Nairobi to households increased their perception of a fair bill by 15 to 25%. So that was a nice finding. Some observations, the mean fair bill was higher than what people were currently paying for 8 cubic meters, so the average amount of water use in the area. For both treatment and control groups, but it was higher among treatment groups. The fair bill was below the full cost of service delivery, and I think that's rooted in the fact that most people have no idea how expensive it is to provide services. And then somewhat surprisingly, customer satisfaction wasn't associated with a perception of fair bill. But the information treatment worked, providing households information about the capital intensity of water improved their perception of a fair bill. And so in terms of impact, I may be one of the few people who's still on Facebook in terms of social media. And if you are, I highly recommend you check out Nairobi Water's social media page. They do an exceptional job of communicating with their customers. And so I see this as an example of how our research kind of reinforced kind of an inclination Nairobi Water already had. So just a few examples here of how Nairobi Water's tried to improve their communication to their customer base. So on the left here, you can see they're trying to make groundwater, right, a precious resource in many cities, and in particular Nairobi, how they're trying to make this invisible resource visible to their customers by providing a reminder of what's there. On the right, you see here evidence of kind of a recent repair that they did, right? So I see this as they're kind of peeling back the surface of the earth to show the vast infrastructure that underlies the city, and also underscoring kind of what a massive engineering feat this is. Again, kind of very much mirroring the information treatment we provided. They've had a great series on Know Your Treatment Plants and Know Your Treatment Processes. So this is one focused on the Kabeta Water Treatment Plant, where they just talk about and introduce the infrastructure that's providing their services. And they kind of walk through the treatment process so the public understands what's happening. And so this is a nice example of careful messaging aimed at customers to kind of help make the infrastructure that's invisible visible to them, a bit more tangible as they think about hopefully paying their bills. So again, just to kind of zoom back out to the research collaboration, we focused on, three small studies, 3 different flavors of impact that's emerged from that and those interactions. But again, there's many studies that have been completed, and there's a suite of studies that are still very much in process. And Richard had highlighted that these are kind of a suite of studies focused on understanding customer bill payment behavior, using behavioral nudges to try to change bill payment behavior, thinking about implementing forgiveness programs to see if that can improve bill payment behavior, and then a broader sector analysis focused on productivity and benchmarking. So there's lots of work still in process there, and we're hoping that it continues to drive impact. So I'm going to hand it back over to Richard just to talk about and reflect on some of the lessons learned and elements of the success we've had so far from an EFD perspective.
Yes, thank you, David, for walking us through that. I want to go through some of the lessons that we learned in our collaboration with Nairobi Water. And there are a few things that are very important if we are interacting with researchers to try and bring or show impact. The one thing that we realize is very important is you need to show up whenever you have appointments. This is not a one-off thing where you just go to the company and they give you the data. Sometimes it requires persistence in terms of whenever you're given appointments, you make sure you're there. The other thing is you need to listen deeply and communicate clearly. What is it that you're doing? What is it that you want? Whenever we are doing these studies, of course, the studies are co-created, but it's important for the researcher to try to communicate to the people from the company and policymakers. What is it that we are out to achieve here? Then the other thing is we need to be respectful of time and constraints and talent. We just heard that, for example, Gitu was in a meeting, a management meeting. You don't want to force your way in. You need to be respectful of what the other people are doing, and maybe if it's changing schedules, you can also do that. You also need to be attentive to the needs of the partner. This could be operational, be personal, could be professional. So it's important that you take care of your partner's needs. The other thing is patience and resilience. You can see that this work has been running since 2012, and we are still doing studies with Nairobi City Water for all those many years. So this is a show that they have a lot of respect for us. We also respect them immensely, and that's why this collaboration is continued for so many years, and we believe that we are going to continue with the collaborations going into the future. We also need to structure short-term wins with a long-term vision for an extended partnerships. It's one thing, for example, to present a certificate of excellence like this one. This could be short-term, but at the end of the day, what is it that we want to achieve in the long term? What are we going to be doing, for example, 5 to 10 years from now with Nairobi City Water? Then it's also important that to recognize that impact in research and policy are very different things. Researchers tend to think differently, and policymakers think very differently. And unifying these two thoughts is very important, especially when you want to achieve impact. So those are some of the lessons that we've learned in the course of our interaction with Nairobi City Water. Next.
Thank you very much. We also have learned quite some lessons, and we really appreciate. Thank you, Richard, for sharing part of the lessons you've learned on your side. But when it comes to Nairobi Water,
Mr. Gitu, please turn on your camera also. I think Richard forgot, but that's a good procedure. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. So we have learned quite a number of lessons, and one of them is the protocols that you need to observe in research. This has really helped the company when it comes to compliance issues. And we've seen that we've now put more observation on in terms of the way we look at our data quality, and even what comes with the data protection requirements. This has really helped us during this time when we have had the research going on all the various aspects. So data quality and the protection aspects are things that we are doing a lot of compliance on that. The other part is that when it comes to the outputs that we get from the research-oriented outputs, is that we are able to convince the water sector institutions on our issues to do on how we move on our policy. And so people like WASREB, who is the regulator, they are more, when they come to advocating for policy issues, then they really rely on these outputs that we are getting from these researchers. The collaboration has also enhanced the research capacity within the company, And we've seen many of our research. We have a research department, and now we're seeing more of this coming up on how people can carry out the research. Although this is still not, we still require more capacity in terms of building that capacity so that we can be able to move forward in these collaborations. Next, please. The other thing is that we have a research and development department, and this is a department that we want to strengthen through these collaborations. And the EFD and Nairobi Water can explore mechanisms of enhancing the research and development capacity within the company. And this will really help us. There's quite a lot of areas that we are looking at, be it on the engineering or the social part, all these areas that we can see some collaboration and see how we can enhance our R&D. The potential attachment of NCWC staff to AFD Kenya could also assist so that they get this experience on how this research is carried out. And so this is something we would be asking in this collaboration, that we have some team that is attached to AFD for a few months to just gain more experience when it comes to research. The other point is that in order to enhance the policy impact, then the focus on other counties, which have the primary responsibility of providing the water services, just like Nairobi Water. This should also be an area that we can see that the counties and other WSPs or water service providers within the counties can actually borrow a leaf from what we are doing with this kind of collaboration. And finally, when we leverage on the relationship, then the collaboration creates a success story, which we can expand to actually other WSPs and within the country and even as well as the region. Those are some of the few lessons and successes that I can attribute to this kind of collaboration. Thank you. David?
Thank you. Let me see if I can get the slides to advance here. Great. And so we'll kind of move towards wrapping up here with just a few reflections for me, kind of developed by the team here, about how we can think maybe a little bit more carefully about policy impact and maybe a little bit more realistically. I think the basics are clear. If we want to do research that has policy impact, we really need to come with a use-inspired perspective. It should be theory informed, but it has to be driven by real world problems and ways in which theory and the skills we have as researchers can improve practice. And the co-development piece has to be forefront. This can't be ideas that we're cooking up in the quote unquote lab and bringing to partners. It really has to come from deep conversations to help us understand the challenges they face on the ground. So that's one piece. Another one is just thinking kind of broadly, and I think this is well reflected in EFD's impact model, which is on the side here, is that, there's many different modes of impact. Some of it's fairly obvious, some of it's a bit more subtle. But, there's ways in which research can lead in terms of impact, identifying emerging and new opportunities. There's ways in which research can support what utilities or policy partners are already doing. Right, you can support emerging priorities and initiatives that they're working on. And then obviously a key role we can play is helping and learning, right? Helping them identify whether something worked and how it can be done better, and thinking how things can be scaled. So there's many different modes of impact that I think we should be thinking about as we frame and plan our work. I think something that's underappreciated, at least by me, and in reflecting on this process with the EFD Kenya team, was that, thinking about causality and impact of research is hard, and selection is a key part of this challenge, right? If we're going to be effective with our policy-related research, we really need exceptional partners, right? The partners have to be committed to a continuous process of improvement. They have to have a public spirit, and they need to be open to using data and research to guide action, right? I think it's easy to take this for granted. And, in the US right now, we're seeing this play out. You can't assume that governments are going to want to improve people's lives and use data to drive decision-making, right? So we really do need exceptional partners who value this approach. And then finally, and this is, I think, one of the pieces of impact that's maybe hardest to measure, is just the potential spillover effects of this work. So we've talked today about, our interaction, or EFT Kenya's interaction with Nairobi City Water and Sewer Company and our long-term partnership. But as Butu pointed out at the beginning, not only is Nairobi Water a sector leader within Kenya, and so there's high potential for their learning and their initiatives to spill over to other utilities in the sector and to the regulator, but they're a high-performing utility in the region. So they're frequently hosting delegations from other countries to share experiences, engage in peer and mutual learning. So this is something from August, where they were hosting a delegation from Ethiopia. In February, they had another group coming through from Malawi. So in terms of our policy interactions, the way EFD thinks about it, and we think about it as individual researchers, this broader spillover effect, I think, has a lot of potential and kind of forces us to expand our view in terms of how we think and talk about impact. And so with that, I think we're going to end and leave plenty of time for questions and discussion.
Perfect. And thank you so much to all four of you. This was fantastic. A really, really good and succinct and interesting presentation from many different perspectives. And